The call came on a Tuesday morning, and the first thing my daughter-in-law said was not hello. It was, "Did the wire go through?" Not "How are you doing?" Not "Good morning." Not even my name, just "Did the wire go through?" I was standing in my kitchen. The coffee was still brewing. Outside the window, the oak tree in the backyard had started dropping its leaves early this year, the way it does when summer gives up before it's supposed to. I looked at that tree for a second before I answered her. I told her yes. It had gone through on Friday. She said, "Good," and then she asked about the second installment. That was the moment I should have paid closer attention to. Not to what she said, but to what she didn't say. No thank you. No acknowledgement that we were even talking about $275,000 of my money. Money I had spent 31 years building, teaching high school history in the same district, coaching JV baseball on the side, living carefully, never once buying the boat or vacation home or any of the things my colleagues talked about wanting. I just saved. That's what I did. I saved because I believed that someday it would matter. I believed it would matter to my son. His name is Wade. He's 34 now. When he was 9 years old, he used to come with me on Saturday mornings when I graded papers at the kitchen table, and he'd sit across from me with a bowl of cereal and pretend to grade his own stack of comic books, making little check marks on the pages with a pencil I let him borrow. I don't know why I think about that so often lately. I suppose it's because that little boy felt like someone I understood completely. The man he became, I'm still working on that. Wade had wanted to open a physical therapy clinic for 3 years before he finally asked me to help fund it. He'd been working as a staff PT at a regional hospital, good at his job, respected by his colleagues. His wife, Serena, had a background in healthcare administration. On paper, the partnership made sense. She would handle operations and billing. He would handle patient care. They had a business plan. They had a location, a commercial space in a suburb about 40 minutes from where I live. They had everything except the capital to make it real. I read the business plan twice. I asked questions. I talked to my accountant, a woman I've trusted for 15 years, and she flagged a few things. The lease terms were aggressive, the equipment costs were estimated low, but she said the core concept was sound if they managed cash flow carefully. I told her I wanted to help my son. She looked at me the way she sometimes does, over the top of her glasses, and said, "Then help him. Just put it in writing." I tried. I brought up a loan agreement at dinner, a simple document, repayment over 7 years at a low interest rate, nothing punishing, just something that made the arrangement official. Serena set down her fork. She didn't say anything for a moment, and then she smiled and said that felt a little formal between family. Wade looked at his plate. I explained that it wasn't about trust, it was about clarity. Serena said she understood, but that they'd rather keep things simple. Wade said he agreed. I let it go. That's the truth of it. I let it go because I wanted to believe that my son's word was enough, and because the look on his face when he talked about this clinic, the light in it, the way he sat up straighter, that look was worth something to me that I couldn't quite fit into a loan document. The first installment was $150,000. The second, 6 weeks later, was $125,000. I transferred both from the account I'd been putting money into since 1993. After the second wire, I didn't hear much. A few texts. Wade mentioned they were busy with contractor timelines and equipment installs. I understood that. Building something out takes everything you have. I didn't want to hover. I'd raised him to be capable, and I believed he was. I started asking about the opening sometime in late September. Wade said they were still working through the final inspections. Serena said the city permit office had been slow. I nodded along. These things happen. I told them I was excited to be there for the ribbon cutting, whatever that looked like, even if it was just the 3 of us standing in the parking lot. Wade said he'd keep me posted. He didn't. I found out about the opening from a neighbor. Her name is Patrice, and she's been on my street for 20 years and knows everyone within a 10-mile radius. She stopped me one morning while I was getting the mail and said, "I saw Wade's clinic made the local paper. That little feature in the lifestyle section. Did they get a good crowd for the opening?" I stood there holding a water bill and an insurance statement, and I looked at her and I said, "I'm sorry, the opening." She said yes. The article mentioned it had been about 3 weeks ago. She thought it was wonderful. She said I must be so proud. I told her I was. I told her that automatically the way you do before your brain catches up with your mouth. I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where Wade used to sit with his cereal and his comic books. I sat there for a long time before I did anything else. I didn't call him right away. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a man who reacts before he thinks. I spent 3 decades teaching teenagers who hadn't yet learned the difference between feeling something and doing something, and I hope I picked up enough of that lesson myself to apply it when it counts. I went to the county recorder's website. I looked up the business entity registration for the clinic. It was registered under a name I recognized, the one they'd used in the business plan. But listed as a co-owner alongside my son was an LLC with a name I didn't recognize. A numbered company, the kind with no real name behind it, just a string of digits and the word holdings. I wrote the name down on a notepad. Then I called Wade. He picked up on the 4th ring, which was more than he'd been doing lately. I asked him how things were going. He said busy. I asked about the clinic. He said it was going well, getting their patient intake systems in order. I said that was good to hear. I said I'd been meaning to ask about the opening. There was a pause. He said, "Yeah, we did a soft opening a few weeks back, pretty low-key." I said I hadn't known about it. Another pause. Longer this time. He said it had come together quickly and they hadn't wanted to make a big deal of it. I asked if his mother's sister had been there, his aunt who lives 20 minutes from the clinic and who had been asking me for months when the party was. He said no, it had been very small. I asked who was there. He said Serena's family mostly, her parents, her brother, a few colleagues. I sat with that for a moment. I said, "Wade, I put $275,000 into that building." I didn't get a phone call when the doors opened. He didn't say anything. I said his name again. He said, "Dad, it wasn't. We didn't want it to be a whole thing." I asked him what a whole thing meant. He said Serena had thought it would be easier to keep the opening small and do a bigger event later once the practice was established. I asked if he had agreed with that. There was a pause that told me more than the words that came after it. And what came after it was him saying yes. He'd agreed, and he was sorry I felt left out. Felt left out. I let that phrase sit between us for a moment. Then I said I'd like to come see the clinic in person. He said, of course, sure, they'd set something up. I said I'd like to come this week. He said he'd check with Serena on the schedule. I drove out there the next afternoon without telling him. The building was nicer than I'd expected. Good signage, clean exterior, a row of small cedar shrubs along the front walkway that looked recently planted. Someone had put thought into the curb appeal. I sat in my car across the street and looked at it for a while. The lights were on inside. Through the front window, I could see the reception desk and a waiting area with upholstered chairs. A woman at the desk was talking to someone, laughing at something. I thought about the morning I walked into my first classroom. The smell of chalk and old wood and possibility. The feeling that this place, this room, was going to be where something real happened. I had felt that way for 31 years. I hoped Wade felt something like that when he walked through those doors every morning. Then I thought about Patrice in my mailbox and the look on her face when she assumed I already knew. I went home. That evening, Serena called me. Not Wade, Serena. She said she wanted to talk through the next phase of the business plan. She said they were looking at adding a second treatment room, and the build-out quote had come in higher than expected. She said they were about $60,000 short. I held the phone very still. I asked her to give me a few days to think it over. She said, of course, no rush, though the contractor had a window opening up soon. I said I understood. After we hung up, I called my accountant. I told her what had happened. The opening, the exclusion, the new request. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me if I'd looked closely at the ownership structure of the business. I told her I'd found the numbered LLC in the registration. She asked me to send her what I had. 2 days later, she called me back. She had done some digging. She knows people who know how to look at these things. And what she found was that the numbered LLC was registered to Serena's brother. He had no stated role in the business plan I had reviewed. He had no PT license, no healthcare background, but he held a 22% stake in the clinic. I asked how that had happened without my knowledge. She said it appeared the ownership structure had been amended 3 weeks before the opening. She said the amendment had been filed quietly, no fanfare, and that the amendment had also included a capital contribution from the LLC, $60,000. I said that didn't make sense. Where had the LLC gotten $60,000 to contribute? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have records of exactly how your money was spent?" I did not. I had wired money in good faith and asked for no accounting. That had been my mistake, the clearest and most avoidable mistake I made in this entire situation, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. I trusted my son, and in doing so, I gave Serena the room to do what she did. Because what appears to have happened, and my accountant was careful to say appears, because proving it cleanly would have required an audit that my son would have had to consent to, is that some portion of my investment had been routed through the brothers LLC and then contributed back into the business as if it were his capital. On paper, he now owned nearly a quarter of something I had largely funded, and no one had told me. I didn't call Wade that night. I took a long walk instead down to the park at the end of my block, past the baseball diamond where I used to bring him on Sunday afternoons. The field was empty. The bases were still out. Someone had forgotten to pull them up. I thought about what it means to love your children in the specific, difficult way you have to love them when they're adults. When they're 9 and they sit across from you with a cereal bowl and a pencil, the love is easy. It has no conditions because it doesn't need any. But when they're 34 and they have made choices that hurt you, choices that involved looking you in the eye and actively deciding that the relationship could bear the weight of what they were doing, that kind of love has to be something different, harder, more honest. I walked home and I made a decision. The next morning, I called Wade. He picked up on the second ring this time. I said I needed to see him in person, not at the clinic, at my house. He came over that afternoon. He came alone, without Serena, which I had asked for and which he had agreed to without pushing back. And that, small as it sounds, told me something. He knew something was coming. We sat at the kitchen table. I had a cup of coffee. He had his hands around a glass of water he wasn't drinking. I told him what I knew. I laid it out without raising my voice, without editorializing, just the sequence of facts. The LLC. The ownership amendment. The timing. The $60,000 that appeared to have moved through a structure that had my money at its origin. He didn't deny it. What he said was, "It's complicated." I told him I understood complicated. I'd been teaching other people's children how to think through complicated things for 3 decades. I asked him to uncomplicate it for me. He said Serena had handled the business structure and he hadn't been involved in the details of how the LLC was set up. I asked if he had known his brother-in-law held a stake in the clinic. He said he'd known that, yes. I asked when he'd found out. He looked at the table. He said before the opening. So he had known. He had stood in his clinic at the opening ceremony that I was not invited to, knowing that his wife's brother held a piece of something I had paid for, and he had not picked up the phone. I asked him why. He didn't have an answer I could do anything with. He said Serena thought it was cleaner to wait until the business was stable. He said he'd meant to bring it up. He said he was sorry. I told him I believed he was sorry. I meant that. Regret and accountability are different things, but I believed the regret was real. Then I told him I would not be sending any more money. He nodded slowly. I told him I would be consulting an attorney about the existing investment, not because I wanted to destroy what he'd built, but because I needed to understand what my legal position was given, how the ownership structure had been altered without my knowledge or consent. He nodded again. I told him that what hurt me most was not the money. I want to be careful to say that plainly because it's true and because I think it matters. The money was significant. The money represented years of my life and choices I had made and things I had gone without. But money can be rebuilt, or can be lost, and either way, it is a concrete thing you can measure and address. What you cannot easily address is sitting across from your son at a table where you used to eat breakfast together when he was small, and understanding that he had been willing to let this happen. He left about an hour later. The oak tree in the backyard was losing another round of leaves. I watched them through the window for a while. My attorney, a man I've known since our sons played on the same Little League team 30 years ago, reviewed what I had and said that what Serena had done occupied a gray area that would be difficult and expensive to litigate without my son's cooperation, and that the emotional cost of a legal fight with your own child over a business is something that doesn't show up in the legal documents but lands on you just the same. I decided not to pursue litigation. I want to be transparent about that, because I know it's the part of the story that some people will find unsatisfying. I didn't take them to court. I didn't get my name on the door or a seat on the board or a formal repayment schedule. What I got was a conversation with my son that I will carry for the rest of my life, and a clear understanding of where the line is. I told Wade that I would not be providing any further financial support to him or to any business involving Serena until there was a formal legal agreement reviewed by both our attorneys and until there was a transparent accounting of where the original funds had gone. He said he understood. Serena called me twice in the following week. I did not pick up. She left one voicemail. In it, she said she hoped we could put this behind us and move forward as a family. She said the second treatment room would benefit the business and ultimately benefit Wade's future. She said she hoped I could see past the miscommunication. I deleted the voicemail and I took my neighbor Patrice up on an offer she'd made 6 months ago to join her husband's Saturday morning walking group. There are 7 of us now. We walk 4 miles through the neighborhood, past the elementary school and the park with the empty baseball diamond, and we get coffee after at a diner on the main street that hasn't changed its menu since 2009. I don't know what will happen with the clinic. I hope it succeeds, because it is still my son's name above the door. And his name is my name, and I am not built for indifference toward him no matter what has happened. But I know now what I did not know before all of this began, which is that love and money are not the same currency even when they feel like they are. When you give money as an expression of love, you can still lose the money, and you need to be prepared for that, not bitterly, not with cynicism, but with clear eyes. The maple in my neighbor's yard has gone red now, full red, the way it only does for about 2 weeks in October before the color starts to bleed out. I saw it this morning when I came back from the walk. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute just looking at it. Some things are exactly as beautiful as they appear, and they don't owe you anything more than that. There's a version of this story where I stay angry, where I sit at that kitchen table and let the bitterness harden into something permanent. I've met men who did that. Let one betrayal define every relationship that came after it. Let one wound become the whole explanation for who they became. I understood the temptation. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. But I kept coming back to something I used to tell my students when we talked about history and the decisions people made inside it. I'd say, what a person does under pressure tells you who they actually are, not who they intended to be. Intentions are easy. Intentions cost nothing. It's the moment when things get hard, when the easier road is right there, that character either shows up or it doesn't. Serena took the easier road. She looked at a situation where honesty would have been inconvenient and chose concealment instead. And Wade, my son, the boy I raised, knew what was happening and let it continue because confronting it would have been uncomfortable. I don't say that with contempt. I say it because it's true, and because the truth of it is what I had to sit with, and sitting with it honestly was the only way through. What I understand now is that the choices we make around money are almost never really about money. They're about what we think we're owed and what we think we can take without consequence, and whether we believe the people who love us will hold us accountable or simply absorb whatever we do. Serena believed I would absorb it. She had good reason to believe that because I had given her every signal that I would. I handed over $275,000 on a handshake and told myself that trust was enough. It wasn't weakness to trust my son, but it was a failure of judgment to trust without structure, And judgment matters. Clear thinking in the face of emotion. The ability to love someone and still see them accurately. That's not coldness. That's one of the most important things a person can develop. I spent decades trying to teach it to teenagers, and I failed to apply it to myself when it counted most. The strength it took to sit across from Wade and say what needed to be said, without shouting, without collapsing, without pretending nothing had happened, that didn't come from nowhere. It came from 31 years of showing up when I didn't feel like it, of grading papers on Friday nights and coaching kids through losses and getting back up after difficult things and doing it again. Endurance isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly builds something inside you that's there when you need it. And the right thing, the decent thing, the thing I could look at clearly in the morning, was to draw the line without burning everything down. I didn't take them to court. I didn't call Serena's family. I didn't poison the relationship beyond what had already been done to it. I held my boundary and I let the rest belong to them. I don't know what Wade will do with what happened between us. That's his work, not mine. What I know is that the maple in my neighbor's yard goes red every October whether anyone is watching or not, and the walking group meets every Saturday at 7, and the coffee at the diner on the main street is exactly as good as it needs to be. That's enough. Some mornings that's more than enough.